Hi, my name is Forrest Bevington. This is my dad, Craig, and today we're going to be doing a how-to video on how to smoke a brisket.
Okay, so smoking a brisket. Sounds easy, right? Not necessarily. It's one of the harder things that you can do. I've cooked my whole life. I love to cook, and smoking a brisket properly has always presented a challenge. So there's a guy down in Austin named Aaron Franklin that says the only way you really get good at it is just to keep practicing. So this summer is going to be dedicated to smoking briskets for friends and family, and seeing if we can actually get a few to turn out well. So before we get started, I want to just talk a little bit about what I know about smoking a brisket, and we'll start with the smoker. So we've already built a fire in this smoker. This is a traditional offset smoker. Many smokers are good, and a lot of them, a barrel type smoker is kind of a traditional way to do things in Texas. But those folks that have smoked brisket for a while almost always use an offset smoker. The professionals have a version of offset smokers they use that you'll see in trucks from time to time. But this is a traditional, inexpensive backyard smoker. We bought this for about $200. We've used it well, as you can see. When we get started here, the first thing you want to do, of course, is build a fire in the smoker. Again, that sounds like something that would be very easy. Sometimes presents a problem. I like to start the fire initially with charcoal, using something called a minion method. So I don't have a way to illustrate that here, but the minion method basically is where you would take a bed of charcoal, and I typically will spread the charcoal out in the grill itself over the grate, and then you'll take about 20 briquettes out of the center of that and put it into a chimney, and then start that charcoal in the chimney. And the thought process here is you take the charcoal, and then once it's started, put it back into the center of your existing bed of charcoal, and it'll slowly spread to the adjoining surrounding charcoal, giving you a kind of a slow burn. This also helps get the wood. So you're not actually smoking using the charcoal, you're smoking using wood. So talk about wood for just a second. There's a lot of different thought processes on what type of wood to use. The wood that we would use here in Central Texas is typically a post oak. You see that a lot. You also see people using pecan. Today I couldn't get any post oak, so what I've got is one of my favorite woods, which is hickory. Hickory it gives it a little different flavor. It's still a milder wood, whereas the pecan is a little harsher. Now you may say, well, what about mesquite? That's probably the wood that's most widely known in Texas. Mesquite's not a good cooking wood. It's great for grilling, but it really gives a much harsher taste. You don't want to create so much of a smoke taste that it overpowers the meat. So we're going to use today hickory, and I may even sprinkle in a little bit of cherry. Okay, let's talk about the brisket a little bit. So the brisket isn't known as the tastiest piece of meat. As I mentioned before, it's one of the harder cuts of meat to actually cook. This is a packer cut brisket. There's many different grades. There's two primary different grades of brisket, choice and prime. This happens to be a prime brisket from Costco. I found that their prime is about the same price as many of the choice briskets you'd find in other supermarkets. So before we get too far into this, we'll get this opened. We'll start with a knife, and the knife is is one of the more important things in going through this process. I like to use a boning knife. This is actually, this is inexpensive. I think it was around $14. I think this was probably bought at Walmart, primarily used for filleting fish, perfect for cutting the fat off of a brisket. So I'm also going to use, you'll see me use a clean hand, dirty hand method here, where I'm actually taking and lifting with one hand and then never touching the meat with my right hand. It helps as you go through the process not to cross-contaminate your meats. So we'll go ahead and get started opening it up. So when you pull the brisket out, you're going to notice that I've not touched it with this hand. This is it's kind of slimy. It may, you may think, well, is this right? But this is the nature of the meat. As you pull it out, it's going to seem a little slimy. As long as there's no odd smells, you should be fine. Typically, when you pull a brisket out of a plastic bag, there are some gases, if there's any air in it all, that might make you think that the brisket is ripe. This one was bought 2 days ago. It's in perfect shape and beautiful and ready to be trimmed. So as you pull it out of the bag, you'll have a lot of extra liquid. You want to pat that off of the brisket. It'll be a little hard to work with if you don't do that. It doesn't have to be completely dry, but it's easier to work with if you get most of this moisture off. So again, the brisket is divided into really 2 sections. So if you've gone to a barbecue place, you hear them talk about a lean. Do you want a lean cut? Do you want a fatty cut? So what they're really talking about is the areas of the brisket. So the way this is cut, this is actually along the rib cage. And on the cow is going to be in this area. This would actually be the breast area of the cow. This would be the meat that actually tapers off down the rib. This has a tendency to be much leaner. Now you look at all this fat and you say that's not very lean. But as you cook it and you look at the before you cook it, you can look at the marbling here and you can see there's very little marbling in this end of the cut. And that's one of the challenges. You've got a very lean cut of meat. You're hoping, and you can also have too much fat here, but you're hoping to use some of this fat to actually baste the meat because there's not much fat in the meat itself. Now, if you go down to the other end here, you can see that you actually have a lot better marbling. Now, this one's not quite as marbled as I would like to see it. This is fairly marbled here. You're seeing some marbling here. Over here, you do have some more marbling, so you had a better fat accumulation here. Now there's also pieces of fat here. As we trim the brisket, we can talk a little bit about it. That you want to get rid of. This is a hard piece of fat. It's almost a gristle, but it's not. And this is a piece that we'll actually cut off. We'll also cut off. This is joined to, and I think a part of this decal. This actually runs. As you feel it, you can tell a difference. This is a softer fat down here. Along here, you have a harder fat. This will not render out. And so you actually want to take and cut this piece of fat out of the meat. So while I'm not a professional at this, I'll make an attempt to get this brisket trimmed down to a manageable level. The line of thought is about 1/4 of an inch of fat should be left on the brisket itself. So we're going to trim this down as best we can to 1/4 of an inch. We'll probably leave a little bit more fat on this end because this end, and we'll talk about that when we go back out to the grill, will be closest to the heat. And you want a little extra fat, a little extra basting power to help in that, and to help baste the meat and keep it moist. So as we trim the brisket, you can feel around a little bit and you feel the softer fat. I'm going to leave as much of this in place as I can. There's some loose places like here that you're just going to get rid of. There will be some meat that comes off in the trimming process. I typically don't worry too much about that. This you really can't use for anything else. A few of the other pieces, some folks throw away more of the brisket. They might trim some of the really thin part off here. This brisket, it's fairly thin. We may take a little bit off of that, but I probably won't throw it away. I like to find some use for it. Sometimes if we have enough, we'll grind it up and make some sausage. Most of what we trim off of here won't be usable. Certainly the decal won't be usable at all. Any of the meat pieces we'll go ahead and use. So again, you're feeling around on the meat. This is hard, and so we want to start trying to take some of this off. Again, you're looking for about about 1/4 of an inch. You could go as much as a 1/2 inch. I tend to like to leave a little more down right here to let it baste. But again, this is really hard fat, so it's not going to do a lot of good. Now, see, as I mentioned earlier, the meat is still very cold. It's easy to cut. If you were trying to do this with a room temperature brisket, you'll find that it's really next to impossible. So we'll go ahead and cut the decal out, which is this part right here, without trying to get too deep into the meat. See, again, cutting big old chunks off. It gives you an idea how much fat is actually on this. Okay, I'm gonna take a little, that's about all I'm gonna take off the end. We're getting pretty thin here. Okay, so on this side, I think we're looking pretty good. So we're gonna flip it over. I think we'll leave most of that intact. It's a nice, you're looking for some symmetry here, fairly square. You could certainly make it look pretty by taking a little more off. We're more about the flavor. So we want to definitely go over here though. And here you've got two issues. You've got more of the decal that you've got to take off. You also have a lot of silver skin. Decal's easy. This comes right off, and you definitely want to get rid of this. The silver skin, as you'll see in a moment, is not as easy. Sometimes you have to work on that a little bit. Okay, we're trimming some more of the decal off here. This is really doing you no good at all. This is not a fat that's adding any flavor to the meat. And again, somewhat like a fatty gristle. I'm not sure if that's the best way to describe it, but if you've ever bitten into a piece, maybe you can identify with that definition. And again, I've seen the professionals do this much quicker. I'm trying not to take any meat with it at all. That's why it's taking me a little bit longer, aside from being generally slow. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. So here we want to get as much of the silver skin off of this as we can. Again, doesn't add any flavor and can actually get in the way as you go to season and rub the meat of the seasoning getting in good contact with the meat itself. So take a little time to do this. Sometimes you can grab a hold of some of the silver skin. This is already torn pretty bad. I'll try to illustrate what I mean though. You can start over here and sometimes grab a little with a paper towel and actually pull some of it off, because this is torn so badly now. It's going to prove to be, I think, fairly difficult, but it's a technique that you can try. The paper towel allows you to grip and pull a little better. The rest of it we're just going to have to try to trim off. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. I think we have a brisket that's in pretty good shape and about ready to go under the rub. In this case, we're just going to mix the salt and pepper together and put this in a little bigger container. And you just want it to combine really well. And then you're just going to put it, rub it onto the brisket. If you're like me, you've been to barbecue places where you have too much rub that overpowers the brisket, too many different flavors, or maybe just a basic rub with salt and pepper that has so much pepper, so much salt that it ruins the flavor of the meat. So you need to be really careful about how much you put on. It is a big piece of meat, so you want to put on a fair amount to cover it, but how much is too much? So really looking at it is when having the black pepper really helps that. So you can look at it and you should see a nice speckling of the seasoning. So the way I like to do it is I'll go around the brisket first. And it's starting to soften up, and you can see it's becoming a little harder to work with. We'll take and just pat it. I like to use my hand like this just to get it on the sides. This end down here. Again, it's easy to go heavy. In this case, as you're seeing, you see the black pepper. It's nice. It's not going to be overpowering. Let's say on that side you're fairly good. This side's a little easier to tell what you're doing because you have the fat background, the fat to kind of come through it. I've also seen people put oil on here. I don't think it's really necessary. Sometimes on ribs I'll do that, but not on brisket. It really sticks quite well without that. Again, you're seeing it get a little dark here. You just want a nice even coating. Don't get carried away. I would say that's fairly close to where we want it. So we've trimmed the brisket, we've seasoned it, and it's ready to go on the grill. So onto the fire. Okay, let's talk about the barbecue and the fire a little bit now. So again, this is an offset smoker. Very challenging to use. The challenging part of this is keeping the temperature right. So to properly smoke a brisket, you want to be around 250. It's ideal temperature is 250. Keeping it 250 in this small of a unit is very difficult. You're adding wood, the temperature comes up, the smaller piece of wood that you've added burns down, temperature comes back down. So it is a little bit of an art, probably one of the harder parts of this process. The reason you want to keep the temperature consistent with the brisket is if you get it too hot, it has a tendency to shrink and to force all of the moisture out of the brisket itself. If you have a fire that's too cold, of course your cooking time goes on and on and on, and you never reach the ideal internal temperature, which we'll talk more about a little later. So this is the cooking grate that we have to work with. A very small smoker. You can fit a good sized brisket on it, maybe a chicken, maybe a pork butt. That's about all you can do. Talk a little bit about the fire and the wood. We're using, in this case, again, hickory. And these are smaller pieces, as you see. Now I do have some larger pieces in here as well, like this. This piece ideally will be cut down, and I have a chop saw to do this, to about half of that size. If you added this whole piece, you're going to wind up with a fire that's really, in this small smoker, going to be a lot more than you can deal with. So we're ready to go on with the brisket. Again, as we just described, we're going to position the brisket to where the large portion is down at the hot side of the grill. I'm going to intentionally move the brisket down to this, as far away from the heat as I can. I don't have anything else on the smoker itself right now. And if I did, I would have a hotter portion. I could put a piece of pork butt or a chicken, which actually does cook well at the higher temperatures down on this end. So I'm going to lay it there. The heat's going to come up and it's going to hit this first. So, and this is the larger portion, the fattier portion of the meat, and it will tolerate a little more heat. The thin portion is going to be down here. I'm also going to purposely stay away from the chimney, because the chimney has a tendency to, as the heat's rolling around, to attract a little more heat as well. So while you can't completely avoid the hot spots, you can try to position the meat to take advantage of the type of smoker that you're using. Okay, we're about 3 hours into the smoke, and our temperatures, we just put a little more wood on the fire. Our temperature's maintaining around 250, which is where we want it. Everything's looking good. Let's take a look at the brisket. It's starting to get a little smoke on it. Little caramelization around the bottom of the brisket. It looks good. You're starting to see a little puddling. The fat's starting to render out a little bit, and you're starting to see a little puddling up here on the brisket. That just means the brisket's basting, slowly basting. And you're starting to see, you can't see down in the bottom here, but there's some drippings that are coming off of the brisket. It hasn't shrunk up, which is really what you're looking for. So far, I'm pretty happy with this. One thing I didn't mention earlier was it's really important, important or a good idea, to put some water in with this. Sometimes I put it below the grate. Up here is fine as well. All you're looking for is to create a little extra humidity, a little extra moisture in the smoking chamber. So happy with the way it's going so far. We got about 9 hours to go.
Alright, with about 6 hours left in the smoking process, we want to go ahead and get our sauce started. For this sauce, you're going to need 1/2 cups of ketchup, 1/2 cup of white vinegar, 1/2 cup apple cider vinegar, a 1/4 cup dark soy sauce, so you can just use regular soy sauce, 1 tablespoon garlic powder, 1 tablespoon onion powder, and then 1/4 cup brown sugar with 3 tablespoons of freshly pulled espresso. What's the secret to this is that at the end, you don't put the espresso in. What you do first is you go ahead and mix the ketchup, the vinegars, garlic, and onion powder. Get that going, bring that to a simmer. And then you want to put the espresso in, but the secret to give it that smoky taste is going to be brisket drippings. Okay, so we've been going ahead and we've been smoking the brisket for around 11 hours now. It's about an hour away from being ready. And the sauce takes a little bit to get ready, and it's at a simmer right now. I went ahead and put the finishing touches on it, but we got one last thing. While we were smoking the brisket, we went ahead and put a pan below the brisket in the smoker that helped gather the grease and the sauce from the brisket. Got all the greases and everything. It gives it the smoky smell, which will give it an unbelievable taste.
Okay, it's been about 13 hours. We had to extend the cooking time a little bit. We didn't quite get to the 200 degrees, and our temperature also dropped below 250, which was our ideal cooking temperature. What we ended up doing is wrapping the brisket as we extended the time. It was starting to darken up a little too much. This is a technique we really didn't talk about, but one thing that can be done when you're cooking a brisket, if you think you're getting too much smoke, is to wrap it. You can wrap it in foil. Wrapping it in butcher paper, though, is really a better choice. It allows it to I think, to breathe a little better. Let's take a look at the final result here. Oh, that's beautiful. You got a nice jiggle to it. This is what you want to see. You got some nice crust going on. The fat pulled up beautifully over the brisket. I think this is going to be a winner. Let's cut into it and see what we get. Okay, so this is the final product. We have a brisket that jiggles nicely. That's something that we like to see. It's cooled off a little bit, so it's not quite as loose as it was. And we're going to go ahead and cut it. But before we cut it, let's talk a little bit about the two pieces here. Again, this packer cut brisket comes from the breast and actually runs down the side. And you actually have really two muscles, two different pieces of meat, and it's separated by a layer of fat called the duckle. In this case, this grain actually runs like this, and in this piece, the grain is more, it's a little bit of an angle, but runs more like that. So cutting meat, you always want to cut across the grain. What we're going to do is slice this in about 1/4 inch slices down till we get to the decal right about here. And then we're going to take and probably cut this in half and slice it this way. That way you're maintaining a nice cross cut. Also, the importance of the thickness. 1/4 inch cut is really nice. You can go with a really thin cut. If you've got a tougher brisket, it's a good way to hide tougher meat. Or you can go with a thicker cut if the brisket is a little too dry. So we'll go ahead and start cutting into this and show you what we're talking about. Okay, we're going to start with the end. I'm going to cut off some of the end pieces, which we expect to be a little crusty. and hopefully not real dry. We'll get a nice layer of fat here. And I like about that thickness. Sometimes when you get some loose fat like that, it will tear. I like to leave as much of the bark in place as possible. You do see some people take and, when you're having barbecue, they'll take and scrape all of the fat off and all of the bark off. To me, that's the very best part. You never want to do that. So if you see somebody doing that at a barbecue restaurant, stop them, and please don't do it. A little dry toward the bottom, but pretty nice there, actually. Okay. Okay, so we've taken off the lean part of the brisket, and now we're to the fatty. So we cut off the point. I want to talk a little bit just about the smoke ring here. So what we were trying to accomplish, and with a brisket, this is really something that you always want to see, is a nice smoke ring. We've really accomplished that here. You see a beautiful smoke ring all the way around the brisket. Now you still have part of the flat, or the lean portion of the brisket down here. That's going to be one of the best parts. Even though it's lean, it's been basted by the fatty brisket on top. And you can see here the decal as it goes through the meat and separates this. So this is the part that I was speaking about earlier. And I'm going to cut one more piece off of here, and I'm going to do something called a pull test with the lean portion of the meat. So you want your brisket to be tender and moist, but you like it to be able to hold its own weight. So you should be able to easily pull some of the brisket apart like that. That's beautiful. You can also do something that's called, if you're cooking a brisket, and I've done this a number of times and it turns out well, you pull the brisket out, you've wrapped it, but then you'll go ahead and wrap it in foil. You say you're going to a picnic or taking a brisket over to a friend's house. You can wrap it in foil, then wrap the brisket in a blanket and put it in an ice chest, and it will stay hot for 3-4 hours. When you pull it out, it's very moist and tender. It can get a little too moist if you leave it in there too long. I've never had any complaints about that, but it's a really good way to transport your meat, and it's also something that Texans call the Texas crutch. Okay, to wrap this up, we plated the brisket. We're serving this, in this case, with a little less traditional barbecue fare. Typically, you would see, of course, potato salad, coleslaw, rolls. We're doing a mashed cauliflower and a quick tomato salad with just cherry tomatoes, salt, pepper, and olive oil. It'll go beautifully with the meat. My thought on that is it doesn't overpower the meat. No carbs in it, really. So you have a relatively healthy meal. Don't be afraid of the animal fat, and cheers.